So beginning with the benefits realization ITT that's just gone out to define those points, us working in collaboration with them at that time to come up with the eval questions should result in the baseline, which of course we want to make sure is plausible and achievable, even just based on the questions. From that it kind of broadens out, and we've got obviously the program itself that runs the IE Prog with all the projects that run along at the bottom here, and what we've kind of talked about at the top is what the consultant can manage. So being able to talk about the fact that there's this formative part that also has the supportive layer involved in it, that it should be an iterative process that builds and feeds back to the projects while supporting them, and then that kind of process of those working together is the manage eval. So obviously the consultants gather data, which will then turn into analyzing the data, the case studies, which will turn into the landscape survey, and then the overall support. And then the other things that we've realized is that we're going to need to define those, as Bal and I are going to need to define those, and the other important part are the other sources, so international sources or whatever, and how that feeds back into the landscape survey. Other than that, the other points that we're still kind of thinking about is potentially from the baseline, the quantitative things that we could get from each strand. So for example, repositories, doing a baseline on number of objects in each repository now versus by the end of the project, and then maybe identifying, again, very simple metrics for each strand. So say like metadata, being able to define the number of people who are trained in doing metadata, having a baseline for the number who are, and then by the end of it, who will. And then there's also, we need to figure out the overall program manager evaluation from the start to the end of the project. The other key thing that we're really concerned with is the overall summative, inclusionary, and what the final outputs from that summative will be, whether it's synthesis. We talked a lot about the tree genealogy, which again, in kind of working backwards from this, and we probably need to do this with each one of the overall outputs, is that in working backwards, how do we get that data? So the data actually comes back to, say, like a genealogy of projects relating to projects, being able to put that in the final project report, so to require each project to define projects they've built upon and projects that they've output to, which would then, of course, lead to a tree genealogy. And then, of course, some of the other things, the program management evaluation, which feeds back to that lower one, and we need to talk about that more, and then the case studies and how they feed into the landscape survey, and then the key one being the final report and how that finally feeds into the benefits, the eval questions, and some other key things. We need to investigate that with Andy to see what he thinks about that stuff.